I just wanted to add one comment too. I actually teach a class here on race and justice, and we meet every week. And the issues that we talk about are exactly the issues that Stephanie brought up. The textbook that we use is from Dr. Sean Gavadon and Helen Taylor Green from TSU.
Oh, yeah.
And we know disproportionately that African Americans and Latino Americans are in the judicial system. We know the system sometimes is, and most of the time, does not necessarily work in our favor. But the one thing that I applaud the students are is taking the opportunities to learn the knowledge and get the understanding and the statistics on exactly what's happening. As you said, don't just sit by and let things happen without having that information, because knowledge is power. You know, some of the students in my class didn't even realize that, you know, whites used to get lunch too a long time ago. Some of the students didn't realize that if you're going to be stabbed in an office in white collar crime, that's going to be a Caucasian American that's going to commit that crime and not a black American. And the one thing about the book, the textbook that we have, is that we have the understanding that, you know, even though blacks make up the minority in the population, we're the majority in the criminal justice system, and that's because the laws have been applied disproportionately. So as you get the knowledge and as you learn how things need to be happening, and as you go through from day to day, spread the information on how we need to make sure to understand exactly what's going on.
When is your class taught?
Yeah, it's actually Race and Justice.
No, when is it taught?
Oh, it's taught on Mondays Tuesdays from 4 to 6:50. So, yeah.
Got that?
Yeah, so, but the thing about it is, that's gonna make you a different person. In my class, when I see the young students come in, I teach them the correct definition of prejudice and discrimination and race, you know, culture, what's on the inside and not what's on the outside. You can look at a person and think, oh, they're black. They could be very white, you know, and you can't judge a person by what you see on the outside. Get the knowledge, stay in school, take the classes, get the information, come to speaker sessions like this so you can listen to individuals who actually know. And like you said, take advantage of those of us who've been there, who've learned different things. We didn't get where we are today unless somebody else got us to this point. And that's very important.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. No problem.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hello. I have a question about the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of people recently have been talking about how, you know, we're not getting the response that we want from the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you think that our efforts would be better served going into the community and helping these people and showing Black men your life matter on the community level versus media attention? Because a lot of people have said, we're trying to convince white people. We're trying to convince white people that our lives matter. Wouldn't our efforts be served better going into the community, convincing our people, hey, your lives mean something?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, but I'm not sure it's one that I would ask as though it's a polar opposite, because it's the way you have asked the question is, should we do one and not the other, rather than is it a matter of both and? I think the thing that I think causes a bit of concern about where BLM is, Black Lives Matter movement, is what is the definition of success? You know, what is the metric that one uses to determine if you have succeeded in achieving a stated goal? That is what sometimes is unclear about this social movement. Unlike the movement of the 60s, where we had endpoints where we pretty much knew what we were fighting for. And some of it was to change minds in the community, and some of it was to change minds of those people who made decisions outside of the community, who made decisions and resources. And we won some and we didn't win some. But I think in this instance, you have to distinguish fighting to change and introduce new policy into the system versus fighting to change the opportunity structure or the level of consciousness of its victims. And those are two related but distinctly different kinds of movements to have on the ground, with different metrics for whether or not you succeeded or didn't succeed. At the end of the day, you must be trying to change the system. You absolutely must do that, however long and laborious and complicated it might take. You cannot leave the system intact and think that you have introduced a durable change. Because if you leave the system intact, then the incidents that you're fighting against will continue to repeat themselves and replicate and duplicate themselves. So we all collectively have to fight to change the policies in the system, the procedures of the system, the way the system operates. We've got to change that, and I think there's a universal agreement that must be changed. Now, what we don't always agree on, excuse me, is which part of it to attack at what time, the sequencing of it. And that's a discussion that involves, I think, very refined strategic understanding among those who are the planners of the social movement. You've got to have a strategic understanding of how the system works that you're fighting and what parts of it to take on at what time with what resources. And that's, to me, something that is still emerging and evolving because this is still a very, very, very young movement. And so it doesn't have answers to everything. And some things it can't answer theoretically or a priori in advance. Some things it will only be able to answer in the act of struggle. Because much of what we did in the 60s wasn't because somebody had a grand theory. It was because we took chances when we didn't have answers and didn't know. We took risks, and we know sometimes that we would live or die. But we believed that you had to act in order to change the system. Not randomly and irrationally act, but you had to plot out very carefully. You had to look at what you were trying to get done, how you were going to try to do it. You had to understand the adversary, what were the strengths and weaknesses of the adversary, what were the risks in different options, and most importantly, how would your constituency respond and react to the actions that you take? Because there were often times when many of our people did not agree with what we did. And they were public in their disagreement, but we did it nonetheless because history was driving us to do so. So I think that there is some degree of relevance in raising strategic questions about social movements and how social movements do what they do, how organizers do what they do, and how you subsequently decide to do what you're going to do, which may not be something us older people will always agree with or understand. But that is the value of youth, that you don't have mortgages and you don't have bills to pay and you have the luxury. You can just do stuff. That's the value of young people. That was always has been. So my advice is to make sure you are designing strategies to change policies. At the same time, working with the victims of the system whose lives do matter is another body of activity that you can engage in, but you have to also be clear, what does that mean? What should I do to convince you, if you've been a victim, that your life does matter to me? Do I just hug you? Do I just kiss you? Do I sing to you? Do I write a poem to you? Do I try to become intimate with you? Do I invite you into my home? Do I try to organize resources to support you in how you try to emerge out of the situation? Do I help you try to find a job? Do I try to find spiritual counseling? Do I try to find mental health services? What do I do to show you that you have value to me? It's always an important part of any system of social change. You matter to me. Why am I doing this? Because I love you. In the agape sense, however, not necessarily the erotic sense, but in the agape sense, where love is an unconditional act and sacrifice of self for the well-being of the other. How do I engage and show you that you matter to me, that your life is consequential to me, that I'm willing to make some level of sacrifice for your well-being? That's what I mean here by love. So you've got that, but that's a different problem than trying to change policies within the system. You always need people doing both, in my opinion. It's not either or. Now, you may choose one or the other because your strengths might be on one side and not the other, and that's legitimate. You need to be honest with yourself and say, I can do this better, and I'm more prepared to do this better. My interest is my passion is trying to help people as persons to become whole. That's your passion. Well, maybe that's the side you should be working on. Somebody else might be much better at organizing strategies and tactics to disrupt the status quo and to insert new ways of doing things into the status quo. That's the direct action. That's writing policy prescriptions. That's engaging in debate and dialogue with public sector officials. Not everybody's good at that. Not everybody wants to do that. But together, you sit in the room and ask yourself, which of these problems are we going to focus on? Which will we prioritize? And which would our resources best allow us to do? And then you go from there. But I would advise you to have an open conversation about it without arguing with each other, that you're right, no, you're right, and you're wrong. Because it's not a right or wrong. It's not an either or. It's a both and, but you can't always do both and. You may not have the capacity, because a lot of this comes down to what is your capacity, what is your ability to get real things done in the real world, which is different from talking about it, which is different from reading theories of criminal justice behavior and all that in the classroom. Because now you're in a real live situation where the objective reality you discover may not be what you thought it was going to be. It may be something very and totally different. So you're going to have to do a little bit of experimenting very carefully to figure out where to eventually land, what are the resources at my disposal, who are my allies, who are my adversaries, how am I going to get from A to B. All of that is a part of what might help you to make this decision. But please recognize the need for both of them to happen and just figure out which can you best contribute to happening. And that might help you to actually see some results that are useful and meaningful. So I don't know if that helps you with the question, but that is what I would recommend that this movement seriously look at as the way of doing business. Now, the way I sometimes see it, I'm not always sure how this movement makes its decisions about its action targets. What should I do? When should I do it? Who should be involved? I just left a conference a couple of months ago in the Northeast talking about social movements and economic justice, because a lot of the older people say, y'all don't have a program. After y'all have protested, which you do a lot of, but what's your program? What's your program? And then somebody on TV comes on and says, they don't have no program. They don't, and then somebody else said, but these young men out here need jobs, and they need job training, and they need better schools and better health care like they did in Baltimore. They need everything. A total remaking of that community is what they said, is what the young brothers on the street needed and young sisters, okay? Well, $2 to $3 billion, I understand, was put into the city of Baltimore, but the community never saw it. It went through somebody else's hands, and it wasn't always the hands of black people, though there were some quote-unquote Negroes involved in receiving the money, and big white institutions got the money. But on the ground, the people don't see the results of that money. So now you have a new kind of problem that you didn't have before. You got middle-class hustlers, and you got people who are pimping the movement and using it for their own personal gain. Now that's a whole different problem that you need to be aware of if you weren't aware of it before. But in Baltimore, they got hip because they got burned. So you have to then know, what am I going to do about this lack of program that I'm always accused of not having? And when we begin to try to do a program, the first thing that the power structure says, but you don't have the capacity to do it. We need to put this money in the hands of somebody who has experience, and first in managing this amount of money, and two, has some idea about what kind of programs to do to help these young men. Because you're the protester, but you may not be the program developer. You see what I'm saying? And this is something we learned the hard way. Somebody might shake the tree to get the jelly to drop. Somebody else might pick up the jelly and do something with it. And so you've also got that problem, that you may be the source of the protest, but you're not always the source of the solution. And so this is another challenge that you have to think through as you're doing this, and maybe other resources can be brought to bear, maybe other institutions and other technologies can be brought to bear to help support the protest side of the social movement. You gotta have the protest side, but at some point, you're gonna have to raise the question about the program side. And how do we maneuver once the system starts to say, well, okay, we'll introduce some new policies, or okay, we'll introduce some programs for guys coming out of prison. You know, we'll have some re-entry programs for them. But maybe you're not gonna be the person who runs the re-entry program, because that may or may not be your skill set. And then I heard some other things, the typical problems that happen with a new social movement, and that is people put some money out there directly into the hands of the social movement and pick off the leadership. Say, well, we're gonna give you the grant. We're not gonna give it to the people over here. Or you the person who we trust, so we'll negotiate through you, but not these people over here. That's always a favorite divide and conquer technique that happens in social movements as well. And so that's something you have to be somewhat careful about. Again, are you going to be involved in programming at all for people who are coming out of the system or who are in the streets? Will you have the capacity to do that? Will you have the technique and tools to do that? Or will you ally yourself with somebody who does? And if so, under what terms and under what conditions? So I think there's a lot that this movement has to think about. It's going to make mistakes, as movements always do. It's going to achieve some successes, as movements always do. And the world is a better place, however, because of what this movement is doing. Whatever people have to say or not say about the Black Lives Matter movement, it's been brewing for a long time. Do you all remember something called the Gender 6? You all don't know the Gender 6? Oh, wow. Well, about 7 years ago or more, I was still on the faculty at Dillard University at that time. 6 young men in Jenner, Louisiana had gotten accused, and they were all about to get thrown into jail and locked up for a long period of time. Well, a national movement was put in place using Michael Basson's radio show and a couple of other talk radio shows. And you all know anything about talk radio shows? No? Well, okay. There was a mass movement that happened in a little town called Jenner, Louisiana, which is about 3 hours from New Orleans. And, you know, students came, and young people came from all over the country. That was the beginning point of the Black Lives Matter movement, in my opinion, because it said that the lives of these 6 young black men did matter, and they were accused of you know, illegal activities in their high school, some violent behavior, some breaking and entry, a bunch of what appeared to be frivolous charges that they were about to lock them up on. But a national movement got put in place and intervened and came to that city for that one day. And it was a big, big national thing. Buses just mobilized from all over the country. And so that raised the level of everybody's consciousness to the problem of young black men and police culture, starting in high school and, you know, getting them locked up. And I think that was the genesis of what later became the movement after somebody had been shot and killed. But Jenner was not about somebody getting shot and killed, but Jenner was about illegal prosecution in a small racist town in Louisiana that was about to lock up 6 young brothers and throw away the key. And your generation mobilized itself in opposition to that. And so that was the precursor, I think, of what we see today, because the law enforcement system was put on national trial. And, you know, the fact that Black Lives mattered was what that was all about. And that pressure did make a difference, you know, to young black men and others across the country. Then, of course, after the Trayvon Martin incident happened, the movement took on another dimension altogether that it had not had before. But the precursor was already in place through the Gender 6 movement, and that's something that you all might go and research, because there are lessons to be learned about what was good about Jenner, but what was not, what happened after that march and demonstration took place. And it might be useful for you to take a look at the Gender 6 issue in the modern era. I'm surprised that more of you had not heard of the Agenda 6, because it was pretty, well, 7 years ago. I guess perhaps some of you were not in college age then. I forgot I'm the age that I am. But go back and I would advise you to go back and take a look at the Agenda 6 issue, because it was your generation, and some of the students of mine who were involved in that are now in graduate school, and some of them have graduated, and they call me and tell me what they're now doing with Black Lives Matter. Or some of them have told me, well, I'm too old for Black Lives Matter. They ain't more than 23 or 24. But they tell me sometimes they regard it as old people, you know, which I find hilarious given my age. But you know, that's the way it is sometimes. So anyway, I think that this is a good movement, but I think you have a long way to go. But you've gotten the attention of the world. You got people paying attention to the issue. The killing has not stopped, but you at least sensitized people to the problem in ways that they haven't been sensitized to it before. And some of that has worked on the positive side, and some of it is still being challenged by older people who think they have been moved aside. I'm happy being moved aside, but I took myself out of the middle of that with Agenda 6, because I told my students, I'm not going. And they said, well, Professor, why aren't you going? I said, because it's your time. It's your time to go and do this, because if I go, then I'll become an issue, because I knew all the national leaders who pulled it together. They'll want me to speak and all that. No. It's your turn. You need to go and do this. You need to take advantage of it, and you need to get the credit for it. You need to learn some things in doing it. And that's what I say to my colleagues now. Look, we need to support what these young people are trying to do, and worry less about how correct it is, and quit talking about in the day when we used to in the day. I get sick of my friends talking about, well, you know, back in the day. Yeah, man, but we're not back in the day no more. We're in a new day, we're in a new time, we're in a new era that requires some different things, and we have to all adapt and adjust to it. So we're learning that the Black Lives Matter movement is not going away, and the older people are not going to control it. We can just forget that. You know, if you ever had the fantasy that you were, forget it, it's not going to happen. So the more they show up on TV as disrupting political campaign organizations, but be careful, because there are some crazy people in some of these campaigns who will jack you up. Y'all know that word, right? Well, I hope you know it. But I think you're at least making your point, and I think the country is hearing it, and the country may not want to be comfortable, but it need not be comfortable, because change is by definition uncomfortable. Institutions want to replicate themselves, and they want to protect themselves. They don't want to change. That's what institutions are. They're stabilizing influences, but they're not transformative always. So that's the mission that is on your shoulders. But don't disconnect the issues that Black Lives Matter is raising from the kinds of issues that Occupy was raising. That's what I keep trying to push. A link between Occupy and Black Lives Matter. Because see, it's like tension that is happening between Bernie and Hillary, where Hillary's saying, oh, Bernie's a one-issue person. Bernie's not a one-issue person, but he's known for the one issue. Black Lives Matter cannot be a one-issue movement. It's got to take on multiple issues, because the problem it's trying to address is multifaceted. You can't separate your political activism from the concern about the concentration of wealth and money in society. And that's how Bernie caught Hillary. Hillary hadn't been paying attention to that issue. Why should she? I mean, you know, she was paid handsomely by those very same people, she and her husband. I ain't got nothing against it, but Bernie just caught them where they were not planning to push that agenda item as part of their presidential campaign. They weren't planning for that, and that's how they got caught. They thought it was going to be inconsequential.